favorite things to do is traveling. But not only that, I also love cycling as well. And at the beginning of December 2017, I had the idea to go and cycle in New Zealand. So I planned to arrive at the beginning of New Zealand's summertime, and before that I was actually in California. So I flew to Auckland via Hong Kong, which also went via London. That's kind of a long story. And I arrived in the North Island at the city of Auckland. My first step was to find out about a bicycle. So I went to the local bike shops around Auckland, and I found the best value mountain bike I could find, which was around £250. The next day, I put my Aotearoa bikepacking gear on my frame and on my handlebars. I packed the essentials, and I set a course to get to Cape Reinga, which is known as the northernmost point of New Zealand. Well, I mean, it's actually the northernmost touristic point. And that's where my journey starts, cycling 3,000 kilometers along the length of New Zealand. And in this film, which is part 1 of my 4-part series, I want to teach and share with you bicycle touring this amazing country. How it's filled with endless, breathtaking landscapes, but also how to adapt to its changing weather, talking about the amazing people, and discussing a little bit about the wildlife as well. So let's begin on day 1 at Cape Reinga.
It's really hot, but not hot in the temperature, but just the UV. It really looks very Australian here, and these tropical plants. We're almost at the Cape, not far now.
When I arrived at Cape Reinga at the top of New Zealand, I didn't realize how staggering the view would be. It's funny when you get there, it's so incredible how the landscape is like a mixture of different countries, like all rolled into one. And that's the case when you go across all of New Zealand. It's just constant change of landscapes. As for the history of Cape Reinga, this is where Maoris believed that their spirits would leave the island of New Zealand after death. And from here, I continued to head south towards the famous 90-mile beach.
So I thought I'd show you this river I have to go down. I don't know if I can, it's so soft. Look at this. So it's literally a road. It's gonna be a slow day. It's 2 miles to the coast. So I'm currently on 90 Mile Beach. Just got back onto it, and the tide's already quite far in. I got up to the Cape, so now this is day 1. So there's no fresh water sources along here because it's a f***ing beach.
Now this 90-kilometer stretch of sand was given the odd name of 90 Mile Beach. I'm not entirely sure why, but still, it definitely stretched out for miles and miles and seemingly more miles. I camped here at night and it was extremely desolate. All I could hear was the waves crashing into the endless sand. It even felt rather lonely. Apart from the ocean, it also felt kind of like being in a desert. The next day I packed up my things and I headed on towards Aotearoa, where I wrote to a couch surfer to stay with.
I'm off 90 Mile Beach. Honestly, the problem with that is this: A, the sand, and B, the sand. Because the sand gets inside all of this, all of it. So I have to thoroughly clean it and oil it tomorrow.
After battling some of the narrow roads of New Zealand, I eventually arrived where I would be staying for the next couple of nights with a couch surfer which was along my route. To explain briefly, couchsurfing is an application or website where people can host travelers from all over the world from the comfort of their very homes. Essentially, it's bringing the world to them. Now, funnily enough, the couchsurfer I stayed with was a beekeeper, and seeing and learning about the beekeeping he was doing was really fascinating. And also, while I was staying there, I got the chance to ride a horse for the first time, which felt very different to a bicycle. After a few days of staying at this amazing place, meeting these amazing people, I packed up my things and I continued to head down to the Waipua forest.
Maybe this is day 3. I have to think. 1, 2... Anyway, it's stage 3. And I just left Shane's place. Really cool guy. He's a beekeeper. He let me stay for a few days, which was really cool. I like how I got time. You know? It's summer right now. Weather's good mostly, and being here on such a long visa is quite a nice feeling.
But before I could actually get to the forest, I had to do the river crossing at Reigna. Because I was following the tour of Aotearoa, which is the Maori name for the Tour of New Zealand, the route I took sent me along the river, which I needed to take the ferry crossing. The route also went via Opunoni, which offers fantastic vistas as you can see. And also there's a guidebook for the tour if you're interested for the tour of Aotearoa.
It's lovely. So we're going to pass by a forest today, I think. All goes well. Big trees. So it sounds cool. We're at the beginning of the Waipua Forest. And just taking a quick break to show you the sign. And then down there is the rest of the road. There's this giant tree I'd like to check out, which everyone's been saying about.
Its name is Tanamahuta. It's a kauri tree that I'm talking about. It's roughly located in the center of the Waipura forest. It's estimated to be 2,000 years old. It's 45 meters high and it's 13 meters in width. It's safe to say it's a pretty big tree. And while I was in the Waipura forest, it's extremely lush and it almost felt like a tropical rainforest. Maybe that's because I was cycling in summer. Later on in the day, I eventually arrived where I would be staying for the next night, with a forest ranger who knew the area like the back of his hand. It was great learning and hearing about all the stories that he had while working in the forest.
Currently on a road, or metal road as they say. A curve like this, when the road goes like this, when you're going in that turn, you really have to lean your bike like this, or lower the pressure of the tires. I don't want to do that because sometimes I go on asphalt. And now we're back on sealed road. I noticed that the whole road didn't have a little bike symbol on it.
Like I said before, I was actually following the tour of Aotearoa, hence why I'm showing you the sign. Anyway, after many more hours, I finally arrived where I would be staying for the night.
Spates. Gold medal ale.
A kind family just outside of Dargaville, who were actually also dairy farmers, agreed to host me. Though my original plan was to cross the Cape Reinga, which by the way is the largest harbour in the world, I had to have a change of plans because the boat was currently out of the water for having a service. So I got to stay at the farm for a week over Christmas, which was awesome to learn about the dairy farming that they did, and just in general just having a lot of fun. I was incredibly grateful for this family for hosting me for over Christmas and for a lot longer than I originally intended, but eventually I continued from Dargaville to try and go around the Cape Reinga.
I'm not far from where I'm heading to. I've got 24k to go, and then we're there. It's still dirt track, which is better than riding on a road in some ways, less traffic. Anyway.
Eventually I arrived at the next couchsurfing host that I rode to. They were a really sweet family who were able to host me for the night, and they happened to live right next to the Cape Reinga. Oh, and here's a cat.
So cute.
My main objective of the day was to try and avoid the busy road known as Highway 1. Then that evening, I asked a total stranger on the side of the road if they wouldn't mind me pitching up my tent for the night. And they said yes. The couple who were able to host me were really kind and very friendly, and I really enjoyed hearing about their amazing stories of traveling the world. The neighbors just across the street had an olive farm, and that evening I tried some of the fantastic oil. I did think to myself I would love to work on an olive farm. The next day I bumped into a cyclist who was from Germany.
Chris, everybody, from Germany. And he's also riding from the Cape down to, well, I assume Bluff, right?
Yeah, Bluff.
Yeah, I got a similar one too. And we just met along here.
I was really grateful to finally meet another cyclist who I could ride with. We both ended up with a host that I rode to not far from Helensville, which oddly enough was the person I contacted for the boat service to cross the Cape Reinga. The next day we packed up our things and we both headed towards the city of Auckland.
Chris got some nice shots for me, which you'll see in the footage at some point.
Did my best.
I think it looks good, really. I think it looks good.
Finally, I arrived back in Auckland after 500 kilometers of cycling from Cape Reinga. The traffic did increase when I entered back into the city, But if you stick to the main bike paths and suburbs of Auckland, then riding isn't too bad. Major roads did not have bike paths though. Chris and I both split ways because he had to go and fix his back wheel, and then later on I arrived at my next host place for the evening. It was a really sweet family from Auckland, and I was really grateful they were able to host me. And Mark's cooking was fantastic. The next day, Mark and his son Zach joined me to cycle into the city.
And we're heading on this bike path back into Auckland. I really appreciate you letting me stay though, Mark. You have a lovely family. You're fantastic at food, man. So
there we go. Anyone watching this, jump on warm showers, become a member, enjoy the community.
Now leaving the city, I encountered more and more suburbs. It's not as bad as Los Angeles, but it still feels like a long time nonetheless. But eventually I continued to head south. I pitched my tent in the Hoona Ranges just outside of Auckland and stayed with a deer farmer.
Totally forgot to mention that it is day, or stage maybe 10, I've kind of forgotten, but it's the 2nd of January. I've lost track of days. This gravel's a bit exhausting though. It's nice how it's compacted when it's wet, but it is a bit slow. So I'm heading to Kupu, I think it's called. I'm in the local pub called the Coach House. Pretty nice spot.
And when I stayed at the pub, I got a really good deal for food in exchange for accommodation, which was really awesome. And I continued south the next day, following the bike path that I joined when I was at Miranda, which follows along the marshes of the coast of the Firth of Thames, and it goes all the way down to Aotearoa. I believe the plan is in the future to extend the bicycle path all the way down to Mata, which is not far from the famous Hobbit Village, but they haven't done that yet at the time I was cycling there. By the way, speaking about bicycle paths, all of my cycling routes are available on my map on my website at www.theonegoodroad.com/map. I really liked the bike path because it was pretty flat compared with all of the hilly routes that I was taking in New Zealand.
Yeah, you remember about a week ago when I said that it was really hot and my skin was burning? It's really hot. Not hot in the temperature, but just the UV. I'm in that same country. Now I'm soaking wet. Guess that's New Zealand for you.
I arrived in a town which was seemingly in the middle of nowhere, and the weather in New Zealand, as I was saying before, can change snap of your fingers. And there was a cyclone predicted to arrive tomorrow. I had to seek shelter, and eventually I found an old couple which would help me for the next couple of nights, and I pitched my tent in their barn for the night. And eventually I found a break in the weather, and I continued to get to my next host. Sadly though, the cyclone did drown my laptop, which was kind of a loss on a big investment. As I was getting to my host, I did pass by the famous Hobbit Village, but I found out you had to pay quite a lot of money to go in there, so I skipped the village.
Made it to my next place. A bit annoyed at the moment because my Mac, it's wet, and it means that as soon as I touch the Mac or anything around it, I just get electric shock.
I was really pleased to be sheltered from the storm, and the host I stayed with was a family of farmers who had a son who was really into road cycling. Now, eventually the storm completely passed. I packed my things the following day, and I headed for the Waikato River Trail, which is more of a hiking trail than a bicycle trail, and I found myself pushing the bike more than cycling, but still, the river was really lovely and the nature was really stunning. At the end of the river trail, I bumped into another cyclist who was from Texas.
What's the date today? January 8th. Riding here with Tony from Texas. How's it going?
And he was also doing a bicycle tour around New Zealand. We pitched our tent at this campsite by the river, and we had a really nice chat while the sun was setting.
So currently we're crossing over this bridge, which is really narrow. And it's really beautiful though. I'm almost at the other end. It's really gorgeous. I shouldn't drop my GoPro.
After cycling quite a high climb with Tony, we eventually reached the Timber Trail, which is a stunning 80-kilometer bike trail which cuts straight through the Piora forest. It's an absolutely incredible ride. We encountered these really steep canyons which had bridges which would go across, built only for cyclists and hikers, and I think they were at least 100 meters long. The bike trail was actually pretty smooth, and they did a really good job of keeping it not very steep, even though the bike path reaches up to 1,000 meters above sea level. Eventually, we had to leave this breathtaking forest and we arrived back at the main road where we both split ways. I went down towards the township of Tamaranui, and then I eventually arrived at my warm shower host that I wrote to a few days ago. I suggested to the warm shower host that I was staying with if they knew any friends in the area who had any jobs available. Luckily enough, someone responded to a post that they put on Facebook for me. They were just up the road at the Tongariro National Park. As I was cycling up towards National Park, I finally got to see the Mount Aotearoa, which sits at 2,800 meters above sea level, and it's actually still an active volcano today. Mount Aotearoa is also the setting for the Mount Doom from Lord of the Rings. But in the whole time of me traveling in New Zealand, I personally didn't feel a single earthquake while being there. They do happen from time to time, but I wouldn't let that put you off from coming here. For the next couple of days, I stayed in National Park, yes, that's the name of the township, National Park, and I was doing some work for Ivan's Bistro, which was a bar in town. I was so thankful to finally have some work to put some money towards the bicycle trip that I was actually doing in New Zealand. Then, after saving enough funds, I continued to head south. This is already the end of part 1 of my film of cycling the length of New Zealand. In part 2, we're going to continue to head south towards the capital of New Zealand, known as Wellington, and hop on the ferry towards the South Island of New Zealand. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you've seen, please consider subscribing. And if you'd like to support the creation of these documentaries, donations are really greatly appreciated, either via PayPal or Patreon. Anyway, that's it for now, and I will see you next time.